I'm Rosalind Carita, and this is History and Heritage. And today we have something very different. We are going to actually see reenactors who are going to demonstrate for us what happened on this day, 150 years ago. It was the surrender of Clarksville. Stay with us. This will be a real history lesson.
Hi, I'm Major Jim Lawrence with the Salvation Army here at the Salvation Army Family Store, and we could really use your help in donations of
coats and warm clothes.
And anything that you give to us will help those that are less fortunate in our community. And also, if you come in and volunteer at the thrift store or the family store, it would be great because you could separate clothes that goes to those that are less fortunate in our community. Thank you very much for what you're doing in our community.
At Salvation Army.
I am here today with William Parker, and Mr. Parker is the director of this interpretive center here at Fort Defiance, and he really is an expert on all the historical significance, everything that took place that day. So what we're going to do is have him tell us how everything came together so that that day in February in 1862 we had the surrender. So kind of start us out. I know we have a map here. We have the Tennessee River and the Cumberland, and obviously Fort Defiance was on the Cumberland, but some things led up to that, and I wanted us to get a picture of it. So start us out.
Okay, this is a wonderful map to get the big picture. Of course, Tennessee was a Confederate state, and Grant and the federal government wanted to reclaim Tennessee.
And Tennessee actually was the last state to secede. So that was another impetus for them to want to say, let's take them out of the war before they really get to be in it.
That's
I mean,
correct.
wasn't that?
That's
Okay.
correct. Right.
So here they come, 4 boats.
That's correct, 4 ironclads. And they were under the command of the Army back then.
Okay,
Right,
now
early
that's
on in the
interesting.
war. Yeah,
Right.
they were under the command of the Army. And Fort Henry was originally designed to be the largest of the 2 forts. As it turned out, most of the garrison that was at Fort Henry, the Confederate garrison, had already evacuated and moved overland to Fort Donelson.
Okay.
So it was just a skeleton crew manning these guns at Fort Henry.
But they still put up a real fight.
Yes, they did. They put up a spirited defense, this tiny little band. They inflicted some pretty severe damage on the boats, but the position was really untenable. The fort was built so low that it was even flooding during the battle.
So they, under General Grant's direction,
That's correct.
They floated, or how do we call that? They didn't float. They didn't drive. Did they steam?
Steamed.
They steamed.
That's it. Right.
And they came around to Fort Donelson.
There were about 15,000 Confederates defending Fort Donelson.
So a serious effort.
Oh yes. Of course, Fort Henry, I failed to mention this, it fell on the 6th of February.
Okay.
On the 11th, everything was in place here. Okay, the Confederates were hunkered down in their trenches.
Ready for them.
And the Union Army was in position.
So then Buckner surrenders at Fort Donelson. So what happens from there? Because this is the setup now. Now we're ready to go to Fort Defiance. And I think we all understand what has happened. We've lost 2 battles, quickly, hard, and now they're moving to Fort Defiance. So what do we have left?
The only, and I want to get ahead of myself a little bit here, the ultimate prize, I don't think we mentioned this earlier, but the ultimate prize of the Union forces was way down here.
Okay,
Nashville.
in Nashville.
They wanted to capture that capital.
Right, taking a capital city, if nothing else, it sounds like you're winning.
It is a moral victory.
Right.
That's correct. The only defense that stood in the way was our little fort right here in Clarksville.
Okay. All right, stay with us and we will show you the actual reenactment of the surrender of Clarksville.
Surrender of Clarksville, February 19th, 2012. written by Dr. Richard Gill for the Civil War Sesquicentennial.
Since the fall of Fort Henry, all here in New Providence and Clarksville is confusion, excitement, and hurry to get out. Many of the citizens confidently expect the towns to be shelled any moment, even at night.
Rich men have been moving their wives, children, and valuables to safety in the countryside away from the river. They're slaves too for fear they'd run off. The poor white folks had nowhere to go and little to lose.
A few days since, I sat on our porch and guessed some 3,000 men passed along the Dover Road. There was a continual rush of cavalrymen, infantry, and baggage wagons heading to Fort Donelson. Some paused to talk, and we gave them water and some little food.
For a while, there weren't many soldiers about. They put all their eggs in one basket there at Fort Donelson.
After the rush of soldiers, my cousin and I rode up the road to view the now nearly empty breastworks, fort, and the streets nearby. The houses and lots looked so bare without a tree anywhere to relieve the dark and desolate appearance of things. Some of the houses are occupied by hands that were working at the fort and now have nowhere to go. Others are empty. Only a few owners seem determined to stay and wait the result.
And we all knew the fight at Donelson began in earnest. I never heard such booming of cannon, like the roar of distant thunder. It lasted for hours and hours,
carrying terror to the hearts of many fond mothers, wives, and sisters.
Everyone was scared, but we slaves knew it might be a far-off voice of freedom. We too watched the river, more out of hope than fear.
None of us knew what to expect. Our army might drive the Yankees off, but I did not think that likely.
3 a.m. Sunday, the first boatload of wounded arrived in Clarksville, and for the next 24 hours, there's a continuous line of ambulances and wagons carrying them from the landing to the two hospitals.
The hospitals at the college and female academy were almost full even before the wounded came.
Some died on the way, in the boats and on the landing. Some in the town did what they could, but there were too many.
And so much confusion. Everyone did what he thought best. Desperate people, white and black, from all parts of Clarksville, took to looting the army warehouses there in search of rations, clothing, tools, anything, while other folks looked to the wounded and dying. There was no order there and no one to restore it.
Sudden silence told us the battle was over. After some anxious hours, the fleeing rebel soldiers showed the result.
My cousin put up 4 Mississippi boys for the night. They describe the slaughter as awful and tell us that escaped soldiers are ordered to rejoin the army and leave Clarksville before the Yankees come. I ripped the stripes off a young man's coat that he might not be detected on his journey. Once I enjoyed sewing them on, but now I take them off willingly.
Clarksville was almost empty. The sick and wounded from the hospitals, poor fellows, they're crawling out from every place, walking, going on horseback, in wagons, any way they could get out of reach of the Yankees. 20 of the fleeing wounded were buried that first afternoon.
White flags have been raised in Nashville, Clarksville, and here in New Providence. A quartermaster from Bailey's regiment raised one over the army warehouse near the fort. That part of town is in a state of bustle. No order, no law, or anything else. Yankee cavalry was expected any moment. All is chaos.
The government stores here in New Providence was abandoned in panic. Looters of all colors, those who had nothing to fear from the Yankees or Southern soldiers, took shovels, axes, and all such tools from the fort, too.
The whiskey they turned out into the street for all comers to share. It was safer to take a drink with them than to look too closely at their conduct.
Yes, ma'am. There was no safety in courtesy.
Flag Officer Foote. How's the ankle wound this morning?
Passable, General Grant. And again, congratulations to the Army for taking Fort Donelson.
And to the Navy, especially for reducing Fort Henry.
The newspapers are already full of praise and heroic deeds.
Well, these terrible battles are very good things to read about for persons who lose no friends, but I'm decidedly in favor of having as little of it as possible.
The way to avoid it is to push forward as vigorously as circumstances allow. Such carnage we've seen in these last days.
That's why I especially wish to see you today, your wound permitting. Unless I receive orders to the contrary, I should like to occupy Clarksville soon and then proceed upriver to Nashville.
The Cumberland is in a good stage of water and will be for some time.
That's the good thing about all this snow and rain.
I believe we could seize both places by water soon.
Our scouts report bands of rebels who escaped from Donelson may be reorganizing in Clarksville to make use of the warehouses and military stores and iron foundries. Their aim seems to be to refit for withdrawal to reinforce Nashville.
There's a report that Colonel Nathan Forrest brought out some 3,000 men, armed and in good order before the surrender, and that they are moving overland through Charlotte to Nashville.
He's a dangerous, enterprising fellow. I wager he'll cause us much trouble before this business is finished.
Oh, I shall indeed, sir. Depend on it.
To proceed upriver to Nashville, it will be necessary to capture or destroy the railroad bridge at Clarksville.
I understand there are fortifications covering the river and the town.
Do you believe the enemy could make a stand there?
Given time, perhaps a sharp delaying action, General Buell is moving down from St. Louis toward Nashville. The rebels will need to concentrate there if they mean to stop us from reaching all the way to Alabama.
Again, speed is of the essence.
There's the rub. We can't move the army quickly. The men are exhausted. We need coats, blankets, ammunition. We're short on transports. We have sick, we have wounded, and we also have 13,000 prisoners that we have to ship north.
It'll take about 10 days to repair the damage done to the gunboats during the attack on Donelson.
I propose an armed naval reconnaissance to Clarksville while the main forces refit there.
I will go personally with the Conestoga, the wooden gunboat, and the newly arrived ironclad, the Cairo. Lieutenant Commander Phelps commands her. You remember Phelps? After the fall of Fort Henry, he ranged up the Tennessee River to Florence, Alabama, gathering intelligence, showing the flag, and destroying a rebel gunboat before it was launched.
I do indeed. With your permission, I'd also like to send Colonel Webster, my staff engineering officer, to help evaluate their fortifications and the bridge. Of course, we also send 2 fit companies to act as a shore party if circumstances allow landing.
Could you include a small band? There might be cause for a celebration.
Certainly. Hope springs eternal, as the saying goes. In any case, we need to know conditions at Clarksville, and we need to know soon.
The next day, Wednesday, February 19th, the rain fell in torrents and the long-awaited gunboats came. Those hateful gunboats. They look like they come from the lower regions.
Many of us slaves went down to watch the river. We were excited. Slavery dying right in front of us. But we was careful too. A slow dying beast is often a dangerous one.
One of our neighbors went to see the boats land at Trice's and Red River landings and gave us a full description. The old stars and stripes now waves over our forts and from some of the public buildings. The wooden gunboat Conestoga is anchored just opposite Clarksville, her cannon all just ready to shell the place at the first sign of rebellion.
From the fort, we could see men crawling about on the boats like so many black ants.
Order has returned, but of what sort? Oh, what may we poor rebels in this part of Lincolndom expect now that we're left entirely to the mercy of vandals?
Foote, welcome back, and well done indeed. I read your report, but please tell me more. I intend to go to Clarksville immediately with Smith's division to see the place for myself.
Certainly. But first, I hear you are taking up cigars.
Gifts from well-wishers. Have one? Pipes were my pleasure, but cigars are easier to keep lit and better to chew on when, you know how it goes.
Yes, I do. Well, on approaching Fort Defiance, just above Clarksville, we found a white flag displaying there and at other points along the river. The shore partly found the fort deserted. Lieutenant Commander Phelps hoisted the American flag, and he and the Colonel Webster inspected the works. There were 3 guns mounted on this fort, 3 in a fort near the city, and 2 in a fort a short distance up the Red River.
Not many compared to Donaldson or Henry.
No, but they were well placed. On reaching the landing at Clarksville, I sent for the authorities of the city. Soon the Honorable Cave Johnson, a former congressman and member of President Polk's cabinet, came aboard. Personally, I was surprised and glad to see him. He was an old friend of my father's.
He must be old in years.
I judge he's about 67. As you might expect of an old Jacksonian, he is a reluctant successionist at best. But he has 3 sons in the rebel army in Virginia. With him came the Mayor George Smith, a dry goods merchant and hotel keeper, and Judge Wisdom of the State Circuit Court. Of their sentiments, I could gather little beyond a desire to save the town from destruction.
In any case, an impressive party on short notice.
Actually, they said that they had been conferring for some time as they expected us at any moment. They stated that the rebel soldiers had left the city and fled toward Nashville with portions of the defeated troops from Donaldson.
Just as we thought. As you know, there are complications about taking Nashville immediately. It is in General Buell's area of operations, and muddy roads are slowing his troops. Higher command seems uncertain about how to proceed. You may be asked to supply transports for one of his divisions to pass up the Cumberland and prepare an attack on Nashville from the west to supplement his movements from the north. Are there facilities enough at Clarksville for that division as well as Smith's, assuming Buell's men move out quickly?
The landings and warehouses are undamaged. The mayor is prepared to turn over all military stores such as remain. I believe we can make a few repairs and move sufficient supplies to the place rather quickly. Of course, Colonel Webster can give you more of a detailed assessment.
Good.
The retreating rebels attempted to burn the railroad bridge against the pleas of the citizens, but it was too wet, and so it too remains usable.
Excellent.
They also estimated that some 2/3 of the population had fled the place in panic. In short, the city was in a state of the wildest commotion. They feared we would not respect the citizens, either in their persons or possessions.
We were no small part of that property. The prospect of slave stealing, as some called it, was as terrifying as some cannonballs wrecking their houses.
I assured these gentlemen that we came not to destroy anything but tents, military stores, and army equipment.
It certainly did not turn out that way. At first, private property of every kind was to be protected. Quite the contrary has been practiced time and again. Within a month, with whole regiments coming in and out, wagons were pressed, forage taken, pigs stolen, and anything the rogues may need. When called on for payment, the reply was, "When you take the loyalty oath, you can have it." Gradually, the reins have been tightened since their arrival. Soon, passes were required to move in and out of Clarksville and New Providence, and even to use the bridge between them. We became nothing more or less than prisoners of war.
To confirm these assurances, these gentlemen pleaded with me to issue a proclamation stating my views and intentions to the citizens so that the confidence and quiet of the community might be restored. Contrary to my determination never to write such a document, I felt constrained to issue the proclamation. I made the promise only for the naval force under my command and said nothing about the Army.
I appreciate your delicacy on that point. I have directed General Smith to follow the same course toward persons and property. He's to appoint a special commissary and quartermaster officers for proper procurement of supplies. The men are also taking 10 days' rations Perhaps we can limit the depredations, but frankly, given the temper of the troops after the fight at Donaldson, I doubt we can prevent it. A sense of victory and a desire for vengeance is a potent mix.
By the way, we had use for the band despite the rain. The shore party went on a march through the town, music playing.
The Yankees are fond of such displays. Our streets are now seldom clear of pacing rowdies. Splendidly dressed officers prance around on their fine horses and are sights not at all uncommon.
The officer commanding the shore party described Clarksville as a beautiful village of about 5,000 or 6,000 inhabitants. But he met with no welcome except from the Negroes.
Of course, we were pleased to see them and curious to test their attitudes toward us.
However, he said he passed one house where there were pleasant-looking ladies at the door. They had a British flag hung out.
Announcing their neutrality, I expect.
He confirmed that most of the inhabitants have left.
Did he report anything else?
Yes. He went to the hospitals and says conditions there are grim. Some of the women of the town, both black and white, are acting as nurses under the direction of a physician, one Joshua Cobb, I believe. But they are short on bandages, medicine, blankets, beds, and even decent food. And they told him that the rebel sick and wounded are still straggling in.
General Smith's surgeons can provide some relief. Did he gather any sense of the sentiments of the white inhabitants?
Whitelaw Reid, a reporter who went along, wrote this about the place. Here is a piece just cut out of rebellion, and still palpitating with its old lifeblood. He noted that the few white people who would talk to the soldiers took pride in telling them that there was but 6 Union men in the town.
Whydah, does this sound right to you? I wasn't in Clarksville, and I believe you've lived in Hopkinsville for some years, right? You must know these people better than I.
Seems a fair judgment to me, although the wording seems a bit forced.
You literary critic.
Well, I was a Yankee schoolmaster for a time. Book learning sticks sometimes even to these horse soldiers. But I know there are many solid Southern patriots in and around Clarksville. They had no problem raising a good many soldiers for the cause. Others, of course, are mere talkers. Still others are looking for the main chance. Openly Union men are few, mostly from Pennsylvania, part of the iron trade. There are some in the countryside, mainly to the north of town towards Russellville. For now, they are all without influence and are closely watched by their neighbors. A long occupation to change that.
You know, these Yankee garrisons remind me of guard dogs tethered to trees. Their bite can't reach far.
I hope they come more like flies captured on flypaper.
In any case, there aren't enough Yankee soldiers in all creation to hold down all these places and fight our armies too. Bodies of good horsemen ranging through the country and with the support of the citizens could play havoc on these garrisons with their supply lines as well.
That is a proposition I would like to test at Clarksville as soon as possible.
I trust you will. But meanwhile, we have these men to get to Nashville. Later I'll take to the generals about the possibilities. And remember, when the time comes, the maxim in battle is to get there fastest with the mostest. Now how's that for good bad grammar?
Tolerable enough, given his good sense. And whatever happens, I mean to keep in contact with my friends in these parts. I understand that Adam Johnson is already forming rangers in western Kentucky. I assume Clarksville is in his grasp as well.
The Yankees have become as plentiful as bees around a gum tree. A good many of the houses near the fort are filled by them, and we expect a company or two will remain there for some time. I rode out one evening and passed near where they were erecting their tents. Such a motley crew I never saw in my life. And their language was as varied as their appearance. Irish, Dutch, and Missouri. They rendered themselves very annoying.
A chicken dare not make its appearance.
Scarcely a citizen could be seen at any of the favorite resorts or on the streets.
It's mighty still after such turmoil. Perfect peace and quiet. No stir, no bustle, except the restless, busy soldiers.
Our kitchens are preferred by them to the most elegantly furnished parlors.
Easier to find biscuits and coffee in the kitchen. Then, too, women servants had more influence there than in the front of the house.
A good many of these Yankee soldiers converse as freely with the servants as though they were old friends. Some seem at home only with the Negroes, and the Negroes seem to be perfectly at home with them.
You see the benefits of sharing biscuits and coffee?
Many of the slaves have been running off and going to the camp near the fort. Some have succeeded in making their escape on boats going downstream to Illinois.
It was time for decision and calculation. For the young men, it was often simpler.
Grant had ordered early on that those slaves who had worked on the rebel forts here and at Donelson were not to be returned to their owners. So they formed what the Yankees called contraband camps, some hired out to the army for all labor of all sorts.
And as they got pay and provisions, it was easier for women and children to join them.
After time, some even became soldiers themselves.
Now that was something special. Seeing those former slaves, people we knew wearing proper uniforms, standing guard around town, carrying guns, the army was freedom for them and encouragement for us. It hardly mattered that they were paid half as much as the white soldiers.
For others, it wasn't as easy. It certainly wasn't for us white folks. What can become of masters without slaves? And slaves without masters?
And that's where the agony and calculation was for many of us too, especially for women with children and old folks. Most of them had to bide their time, looking for means and practical opportunity to be truly free. Then there was the emotional tug. Some just could not bear to part with the white families they had lived with all their lives. And frankly, some were just plain afraid of the unknown, the risk of being both poor and free in an uncertain world.
An old lady of my acquaintance clung all the tighter to her servants, fearing them much less than the Yankees. Her slaves protected her and ran her house.
They were free in their own way. There are many degrees of liberty in those days.
Many of us felt betrayed. Some longed to be free of all contact with Negroes, known or unknown. But long ties of sentiment and familiarity are painful to sever. Some ties just couldn't ever be broken, and besides, the army was hardly more reliable for the slaves than for the whites.
True enough. The Yankee soldiers, officers, and men were not one mind of us. Some of them thought we were merely talking mules, made for work and abuse. Others were courteous and helped as they could.
I heard that a Missouri captain had threatened violence against an Ohio colonel because the colonel had allowed a slave onto a transport bound for Cairo. The captain said he came to fight for the Union and not to abet Negro stealing. There was nearly a mutiny, as I understand it.
Those divisions and passions were almost matters of calculation and caution for us. It was hard to read the hearts of other folks, especially when there was so much tension and danger all around. In such times, military order and public proclamation could not guarantee much.
That is so. In the end, we all, white and black, had to adjust every day to our real situations. People had to be fed, clothed, and sheltered. Children still needed to do their lessons and run in the yards. The dead deserved to be mourned. What we did was endure and hope for a better future. As long as the war lasted, there was little else.
Amen.
I hope you've enjoyed the reenactment. I think you can see behind me many of the actors and characters that played in these roles today. This was the actual surrender 150 years ago here in Clarksville. It's our history and it's our heritage.